This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 301 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today we're talking about community-based tourism, one of my pet topics of late. Before I start, let me pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast today. We are in the thick of the Noongar season of Jilba, which is like a big mix of days that might be rainy or cold, or then the next day windy and dry, and occasionally proper warm sunshine. Those are the days I really like. I've had enough of the cold, but it's a very changeable time of year here in Perth. So community-based tourism is something that you probably are aware of without knowing So community-based tourism is probably something you're aware of without necessarily knowing that we refer to it in this way, but you'll learn a lot more about it in this episode. Let me start just with a quick definition from the Good Tourism Institute. So they say, community-based tourism is a way of sustainable tourism that allows travellers to closely connect to local communities, tourism where travellers are invited into local homes, experiencing the actual local culture, the diversity, local rituals and beliefs. And I would add, just to be really explicit about it, that these are tourism experiences that are created within and by the local communities, not imposed on them. I actually had two really fabulous community-based tourism experiences in Chiang Rai last month in Thailand, but you'll hear more about them in next week's episode. For today, I have three guests who talk about various aspects and examples of community-based tourism. And the first is Justin Meneguzzi, who gives us a great overview of community-based tourism and an example from, in fact, his recent trip to Thailand as well.
Community-based tourism, which you often see abbreviated to CBT, is one of those jargony kind of tourism industry phrases that you see bounced a lot in the industry side. It's not yet maybe too customer-facing in tourism, but I came across it quite early on, I guess, in my travel career, because when I was working at Intrepid Travel, they were quite early adopters of the community-based tourism model. So what they did, I guess kind of a bit of a quick introduction to what CBT is there's a problem in tourism where often travellers will go to a really popular destination, one that's been marketed heavily or one that's packaged up in a lot of products, tour products, and they'll spend their money there, they'll have their experience there, but then that income into the country doesn't trickle out into the surrounding region or the surrounding communities. And that's a problem because as big hotel chains open up in major cities and that kind of stuff, the money from tourism starts to become centralized in foreign bodies or perhaps more wealthy tour operators or entities. So the whole concept of community-based tourism is to help communities, so small villages in a place, or it doesn't, that's kind of quaint. It doesn't have to be a village, just have to be somewhere perhaps off the beaten track within a destination, who perhaps don't have an established tourism profile. And the idea is that either on their own or working in partnership with them, as Intrepid did, they help them develop a tourism product. So it might be a homestay or it might be a one-day tour. It's something to bring travellers into that community so that, first of all, money goes to that community. The financial benefit of tourism gets spread further around, and it directly benefits that community by doing that. But also there's a cultural exchange. So by allowing a tourist, a traveller to go somewhere a bit off the beaten track, they're getting exposed to something that they might not otherwise have seen. And that's good for both the traveller, but also the community that is hosting the traveller, because it's a two-way street. They wouldn't be offering up their home or their town or their village if they weren't curious in some way to meet new people, which is a really kind of great social aspect. So when I was at Intrepid, we built one in Myanmar as an example. I think they just opened up one in eastern Bali. It exactly as I say. So you will arrive at a village, and you will typically be hosted by a family within that village, and there'll be a, I guess, structured bunch of activities. So using the barley one as an example, you might learn about, if they're farming, how do they go about harvesting that, or what's the production process. You might then take that further and get involved in a cooking class where you might learn about maybe that particular ingredient or product that they produce in their region. How do they cook with that? What's special about it that's unique to them? And that's really quite special. I guess more recently for me, I was in Thailand, in the mountainous hills of northern Thailand outside Chiang Mai, and I'd heard about a organic coffee farm that you can visit up there. And Thailand has an interesting history with coffee. They tried to farm it, I think, a few decades ago, but it didn't take off because no one really. Thai people don't really drink coffee. Yeah, you know what I mean? They tend to have more like
Yes.
teas or other kind of milky product. So it wasn't really on their radar. But then Starbucks opened, as it did.
Oh no.
Starbucks opened, and then they introduced it for really the Westerners or the foreigners who were living in Thailand, and then the Thai kind of adopted it. But the flow-on effect of that is that the farmers in the north of Thailand were like, oh, okay, well, maybe we should start growing coffee. So there's a coffee farm out there. It's on the border of Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai, two different provinces. It's called Suan Lahu, the organic coffee farm. And I had an opportunity to go out there. It's about an hour outside of Chiang Mai, and I went out there and I met Louis, who is the owner, co-founder of the farm, and he kind of manages it now. He founded it with his brother, but his brother's kind of moved on to kind of other sectors. And it was really interesting to meet him and learn about why he started the coffee. And, we often tend to think of rural or regional areas perhaps as being a bit more quaint or bucolic, and kind of we emphasize, oh, they're so traditional, look at the traditional way of living. But what was really exciting about Louis is that how much he was innovating and how much he was shaking up the space in coffee farming. And the reason for that is northern Thailand has really shockingly bad problems with air pollution. The week before I got there, it was the most polluted city on the planet, which is normal because at the start of the year, all the farmers are slashing their crops, they're burning the waste, and that produces smoke that goes into the atmosphere. And that's bad, obviously, for the atmosphere, but it's also bad for the soil because if you do that enough times, you start to degrade the soil, the nutrients in the soil, the microbes. And what Louis was doing, which is really exciting, is that he would bring an organic approach to farming in the mountains, which, it's not like you're tilling a field where everything's flat. It's a mountain.
It's hard.
Yeah. And he started it about 14 years ago. And when he started it, he was told that it wouldn't succeed. You were told that, organic farming in the mountains doesn't work, and it won't work. And, 14 years on, he's kind of laughing in their faces a little bit.
Good.
Just a little bit. So he's doing this really exciting stuff around forest farming. So it's where he produces coffee as the main product, but also a bunch of other vegetables as well, bamboo as well. And he grows the bamboo because it draws down carbon out of the atmosphere. So that's why he grows it. So he does all this, and it's just kind of scattered throughout the woods. And as a visitor, as a traveller visiting his farm, the exact itinerary is kind of up to me. I was on my own, being hosted, so I had free reign to ask whatever I wanted. So typically when you go there, you're coming into a community, you need to fit in with their program and their schedule and what they do. So what you do on the farm would be impacted by the seasons. So you might be harvesting the beans, or maybe you're weeding the fields, or maybe you're roasting, and that's the really cool bit. So I got there when there wasn't much else to do but roast. So
right, awesome.
So we got to roast the beans by hand, very literally, using a 70-year-old roasting machine that had been donated, I guess, from Europe. And It was just like, it's hard to explain. It's like a kettle with like a handle on it that you just wind by hand, and you plug it in so it heats up, put the beans in, and you're just roasting. And it It was a very sensory experience because when I was there, they were teaching me about how anyone can roast a bean. You know what I mean? It's about hearing, smelling, what you're seeing as well. So it's all the senses, learning how to roast a coffee, which was quite cool. So we did that, and then I actually got to keep the beans as well. So I brought those home
Cool.
to have the beans at home. But if you were just going there to roast some coffee beans, that's a pretty one-dimensional. No matter how great the farm is, that's a pretty one-dimensional experience. What we did, we got to enjoy lunch. So we had a really great lunch that had been cooked by Louis' wife. And then we also did a tour of the farm. So we went for a hike uphill and downhill, where he basically explained what I'd explained earlier in terms of the organic approach to how they farm and why that is different to what everyone else is doing. And he introduced me to this really cool concept called biochar, which is where they, like I mentioned before, they have a lot of issues with farmers burning their crops and creating lots of smoke. But he's adopted this process called biochar, where the crop waste is burnt with such intensity that it produces very little smoke and it produces better quality char. And he was explaining to me, that char then goes back into the soil, so it's good as part of composting. And he explained to me, if I can get every farmer on this mountain to adopt this process, we could go some ways to winding back the air pollution that we have created here in Thailand, which is really cool. Like, it's just really innovating and doing something quite different, which is really quite cool.
Awesome.
But, at the same time, that's really cool. That's really modern and progressive and really, really great. But we walked past a tree, which was like a special ceremonial tree on the farm. And he explained to me that once a year he will sacrifice a pig at that tree and leave the head there as an offering to their god, because being mountain hill people, they don't have the same beliefs as the rest of the Thai people. They got their own belief systems. So that was very interesting. So it's like the old and the new together.
What a combination.
What a combo.
But that's real life, isn't it? That's brilliant to be able to explore all of that and not just go on this quaint village tour where you learn about their traditions and customs that nobody really does anymore or whatever, like to get this real life, slice of life kind of thing is so interesting.
Absolutely. And after we did the tour, we actually went to his village as well, the Doi Mot village it's called. So he showed me around. It's a very small village. I think it's only maybe a couple hundred people living there. And he just showed me around, showed me where he lives, showed me the big wooden arena that they constructed for ceremony, where they just have big dance parties, basically.
Awesome.
And, it's just that insight into where they live and how that is different and how their culture is different to the majority Thai population, which is really special. But I think an element that is really critical to community-based tourism is that the profits brought in by travellers going to the communities need to stay within the community. And so what was really great about what Louis was doing is that they were using the profits from the farm to invest into the village as well. So the example he gave me was that there's only one tap in town, in the village, and everyone washed their dishes at the one tap. And so they had then invested money into bringing in 3 taps.
Wow. That's a significant improvement.
Wow. 300% more taps.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
So they're just doing their thing to kind of bring, a rising tide lifts all boats, to try to bring the community up with them as well with their success. And I think that's really key. And I think for listeners who are kind of questioning, again, because there's a lot of hype out there in the industry about what is sustainable, what's responsible. A lot of companies often promise that they're doing things, but they're kind of not really. And so I think what your listeners should look for when they're trying to identify a community-based tourism project is to look at how the community are involved. How are they participating in it? Are they just kind of window dressing? Are you visiting the village and they're just kind of there wearing traditional dress to look pretty and kind of put on a dance for you? In which case, probably not. But also ask questions about how your visit is supporting the community. Is the money staying with them?
Great overview and example, and I think Justin's final point about not being shy to ask questions especially to check where the money ends up. Good to ask questions of tour operators. Good to try and find out before you go or before you book. Do some research. I am not shy anymore in emailing a potential tour operator to say, hey, where does this money end up, please? And if they have any hesitation in explaining or being transparent about it, then that's probably a bad sign. Of course, we don't always get to have the chance to find these out before we go, but I think the more times we're aware of it and trying to do this, that helps a lot. Now, my next guest today is Jonathan Coleman from Untours, and I've chatted with Jonathan quite a few episodes back, but you might remember that one of the things that Untours has is the Reset Tourism Fund. And one of the roles of this fund is to identify some community-based tourism projects around the world and help them with capital. So I chatted with Jonathan about this part of his role.
Just to say that now I'm just in the early stages of a beautiful journey to encounter lots and lots of community-based tourism companies, and we have encountered some through my previous work in life, but also through the early days of this fund. But we will do much more of that moving forward, which is incredibly exciting for me and our team.
That's a very cool job to have.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like I was just in Jamaica on a scouting mission with one of our partners to identify these types of businesses in Jamaica. Again, a tourism economy that's dominated by multinational companies and resorts, and so figuring out how to help identify those companies that are leaving the money local and are doing amazing things with the money in their local communities and help them be bigger and bigger and attract more tourists and do more amazing things. So that's part of my job, and it's a good part. And I think the beauty of community-based tourism is that it's what the traveler wants. Even the traveler in the all-inclusive resort actually wants a real community-based experience. They just don't know it, or they don't go accessing it. But if they yes, they want the free, like the all-inclusive drinks on the beach, but they also want to know a place and experience a place. And there's no better way to know or experience it than when it bubbles up from within a community. And so that's how I want to travel. The direction travel is going is more experiential, and the local communities are the best place to manage that experience in an appropriate way, both to ensure that the money stays home and that the experience is had in a culturally appropriate way. And there's much better the community itself to determine that than some outside operator, than me or any outside operator. It both economically is more powerful in local communities, and it's stewarded by those same communities, not by some outside operators. They control how and when and where they let outsiders in.
Can you maybe give us a flavor of the kind of businesses you were looking at in Jamaica?
There's one company, small business. It's a fish hut on the coast where they're selling fresh fish and other food. And they've got a beautiful location on the coast. They appeal to tourists and locals alike who come in and eat their amazing food. And they've been there for 40 years. Oh. And they've really established, it's just a good, solid business. It's a family operated joint that, they have a couple other employees, but it's mom and dad and son are all, connected in with the business and making it work. So it's just a good, wholesome business in that sense. And they're looking to be more sustainable. And so they're trying to identify ways to do that. And one way that they have identified is to connect to solar power. They're very interested in bringing solar panels in, which is both an environmentally wonderful thing to do and also an economically wonderful thing to do for them because it cuts their power bills in massive ways, which is their biggest expense. So
perfect.
That's just one example of it's not a huge company. It's not going to be a huge company. It's going to stay a small business. We would like to enable it to be a more successful small business. Both more successful in the sense that the family and their employees grow economically in the surrounding community, and also more successful in how they use their business for good. And so if they can make that money and have that economic power that is generated in a way that is less harmful on their local environment or on the global environment, then that's a win, and we want to help make that happen.
Perfect. Yeah.
So that's one example we were looking at in Jamaica. Another was an organic farm that's in the hills overlooking Kingston. Farm is probably bigger word. It's an organic garden built around a home and kind of a large property in the home. But they're in the hills overlooking Kingston. They have moved into tourism, so they grow. One of the few places that locally grow an organic produce in the country on the island, which is a great outlet for them. But they also are bringing guests, again, local and international guests, to have a an organic farm experience,
Mm-hmm.
which they learn about organic gardening, and then they have an amazing meal of all fresh produce that they've grown there, and they all make amazing salads together, and then they eat them, overlooking Kingston and the coast. And so
Awesome.
it's they're just moving into tourism. They're farmers that are moving into tourism, but they see an opportunity both to share their experience with their community and the world, and to give an amazing experience that helps to supplement what they earn on the farming side.
I love those Jamaican examples, and I also love that the Reset Tourism Fund is seeking out these kind of, especially small businesses who can really, be playing a major part in local community-based tourism. Cool stuff. Now, my final guest today is Roger Smith from Echidna Walkabout. And Roger and I were actually chatting in our interview about various ways to give back. But this quick example is, it's kind of a different angle on community-based tourism from the tour operator perspective.
The other form of giving back is often financial. You use a local accommodation. You don't go to we don't use the big accommodation outlets. We often look for places which are simple. To give you an example there, we run tours in a particular region, and we could put people up in a big motel or something like that. But there was a number of bed and breakfasts around the place that offered smaller accommodation. Like we had a group of about 12 or whatever, I can't remember what it was, doesn't matter. But we put them up in different B&Bs near, sometimes, quite a few kilometres apart. And we had to go to a lot of trouble to separate them out and to arrange. And someone who was organising the trip said, but what about if what they're getting at that accommodation is different than the other place, the meal or the bedding or whatever? And we thought, well, what difference does that make? People can share that the next day. And the people who we did that for were thrilled to bits. And we were too. We had a fantastic time. We made lots of great friends, and that was another way of giving back. That town, by the way, which is in eastern Victoria, we buy just about everything we need on our tour from that town. And it's important to understand that it used to be a timber town, and conservation efforts meant that timber production reduced. And everyone said, well, tourism's the future, but no one was doing anything about it. And what's happening now is we're using everything, we're buying everything we possibly can in that town. I'm not saying we're the only people there, and we're not the only people bringing about change. The people themselves are doing that, but we participated in giving back to that town. So, and there's lots of other examples, but that's just a few.
Yeah, and isn't it's so often the case that those kinds of examples, while they take a little bit more organisation, everyone is winning out of those. Like, as a tour participant, I would much rather stay in an interesting B&B, and, you probably got more chance you get to chat to some other local people that way than to be in like a nameless, bland motel just because the rest of the group's there. Well, that's not enough for me. I'll see the group during the rest of the day, So I love that. That's just it's everyone wins approach, I think. So
yeah, and I think by telling people that they're participating in that, and it's not just a sort of a vague thing that happened. It was planned that way.
Another great example, and it's really nice to see tour operators focusing on working with a community better, and kind of another form of community-based tourism, which is awesome. So that's it for episode 301 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I have to say a massive thank you, as always, to my fabulous guests. First up, I chatted with Justin Meneguzzi, and you can find him at justinmeneguzzi.com. I've also got a link in the show notes to the organic coffee farm he mentioned, Suan Lahu, which is suanlahu.org. Also, of course, thanks to Jonathan Coleman from the Untours Foundation. You can find more information about that and their Reset Tourism Fund at untoursfoundation.org. And lastly, a big thanks to Roger Smith of Echidna Walkabout for his example, and you can find out more about their tours at echidnawalkabout.com.au. And don't forget to tune in next week to episode 302 for my examples of community-based tourism in Chiang Rai in the north of Thailand. As always, come and chat with us in our groups, the Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers or the LinkedIn group for Thoughtful Travellers. There are links in the show notes to those, or just search for Thoughtful Travellers in those platforms. And all of this and more will be in today's show notes at notaballerina.com/301. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.